She just gave him candy. He didn't even know his name. Everyone thought he was a bum. But she looked him in the eye and said, "You're kind." A year later, he came back. Not to the street, to the mayor's office. This story began with a single gesture and ended with a shocking conspiracy. Subscribe and comment where you're watching it from. The first thing he felt was cold stone against his cheek. Then came the sting in his forehead, a dull throb like a far-off drumbeat. His eyes blinked open, greeted by a ceiling that was not a ceiling, just splintered wood beams and water-stained plaster above him. Everything smelled of mildew, iron, and the sweet rot of garbage. He sat up slowly, coughing, clutching his ribs. The air was heavy, stale, and cold. He didn't know where he was. Worse yet, he didn't know who he was. He reached up and touched his face. A beard roughened his cheeks, and his hands were cracked and calloused. His fingernails were dirty, chipped. His coat, a tattered navy wool thing, was soaked through on one side as though he'd lain in a puddle. He looked around the dim, broken room and saw only shadows. Old newspapers fluttered beneath a boarded-up window. Graffiti covered the walls, names, slurs, obscenities. No phone, no wallet, no ID. He stood unsteadily, knocking over an empty can. The noise echoed in the silence. A rat darted from a hole in the corner and disappeared into the crumbling drywall. Panic twisted in his stomach. He stumbled toward the door, tripping over a discarded tire, and stepped outside. Daylight stabbed at his eyes. It was morning, perhaps late morning. The street was half deserted, one of those forgotten corridors in an American city where the paint peels off bricks and every shop is closed for good. A rusted payphone hung crooked on the wall next to him. No dial tone. He looked around, hoping for something, a familiar street sign, a landmark, but nothing registered. The city moved on without him. A man passed by in a suit, barely glancing. A woman on her phone veered slightly away. He called out, hoarse, "Excuse me," but his voice crumbled on his tongue. No one stopped. No one cared. He wandered, confused, down side streets. At some point, he found a park bench and sat. The shaking started in his hands, then his legs. He curled up under his coat as pigeons circled, as if sensing his helplessness. It was on the third day that the police found him. He had been lying near a dumpster behind a diner, shivering in the early morning frost. One officer nudged him with a boot. Another grunted and lifted him to his feet. They brought him to the station. Just for the night, they said. No charges, just to warm up. But even warmth felt wrong. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed like insects. The officer at the desk asked his name. "I don't know," he said. "What do you mean you don't know?" He looked the man in the eyes, terrified. "I mean it. I don't know who I am." The officer exchanged a glance with a colleague. "All right, sit tight. We'll get someone to take a look at you." He was taken to a hospital soon after. The doctor was kind, at least. A middle-aged woman with glasses and a clipboard who ran a battery of tests. "You've suffered trauma," she said. "Possibly a head injury. There's a term for it, dissociative amnesia. Your brain is protecting you from something. Do you remember any names, places, even a feeling of where you're from?" "No," he whispered. "It's all just static." She nodded gently. "We'll keep you for observation. Maybe something will come back." He didn't stay. That night, as nurses made their rounds, he slipped out. He didn't want to be a lab rat in a white-walled cage. The city called him back, even if it didn't recognize him. The next days blurred into a pattern. Sleeping behind grocery stores, scavenging food left behind in the park trash bins, warming his hands over steam grates, watching the same skyline every night, wondering if somewhere in it lived a clue to his past. And then something changed. It was a frigid afternoon, the kind that turns breath to smoke and fingertips to ice. He was sitting on the edge of a fountain in the center plaza. The water had been turned off for winter, leaving the basin dry and littered with leaves. A group of school children passed by, herded along by a teacher. Most of them avoided looking at him, but one girl slowed her steps. She couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. A small, dark-skinned girl with big eyes and an oversized pink coat. She walked right up to him. "You look sad," she said matter-of-factly. He blinked, unsure how to respond. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a red-wrapped candy. "Here," she said. "It's cinnamon, my favorite." He stared at it. She smiled. "You can have it. You're nice, I can tell." He took it slowly, like a man touching fire. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. She waved and ran off to join the others. Her teacher called after her, and then she was gone. The candy sat in his palm for a long time before he unwrapped it and popped it into his mouth. It was sweet, spicy, warm. For the first time in weeks, something glowed in his chest, a flicker of recognition not of a memory, but of humanity. That night, he found a shelter. It was full, but they gave him a blanket anyway. He curled up in a corner on the floor and closed his eyes, replaying the girl's words again and again in his mind. "You're nice, I can tell." The next morning, he walked 5 miles to a library. Not to read, not yet, but to be near books, to sit in warmth, to be surrounded by something that didn't treat him like an intruder. There, he found a notice board listing odd jobs: cleaning, sorting, manual labor. He circled one in pencil and tore off the contact slip. Over the next few weeks, he took small jobs: sweeping sidewalks, helping at food pantries, unloading boxes at the farmer's market. He didn't talk much, but people noticed he was punctual, polite, hard-working. One day, as he was sweeping snow off the library steps, a young woman exited with a stack of books. She nearly dropped them. He caught one mid-air. Their eyes met. "Thanks," she said, brushing snow from her coat. "You work here?" He shook his head. "Just helping." She smiled. "Well, you seem to know your way around. You want to come inside? I could use a hand with sorting." Her name was Claire. She was a part-time library assistant studying for her degree. He followed her in, unsure why he trusted her so quickly. The back room smelled of paper and wood polish. He helped her shelve returned books, file newspapers, repair bindings. She chatted while she worked. At one point, she said, "You ever been to City Hall? They've got a great archive, all the old records, speeches, press clippings, kind of dusty, but fascinating stuff." He froze. City Hall. The phrase rang in his head like a bell. Not a memory, not quite, but close. He didn't say anything, just nodded. When he left that day, he walked in the direction of City Hall without even realizing it. His feet moved with a memory his brain could not yet unlock. Somewhere inside him a door waited to open, and the key might just be a cinnamon candy from a stranger. He still had the wrapper, folded, creased, tucked into the lining of his coat. The girl had called him nice. He didn't know if that was true of who he'd been before, but maybe, just maybe, it could be true again. He returned to the library every day after that. At first, no one paid much attention to the man who quietly sorted returns and repaired broken bindings. But Claire noticed. She saw how meticulous he was with the Dewey Decimal System, how gently he turned each page, how instinctively he placed political biographies in a distinct section before realizing that was where they belonged. One afternoon, As he was pushing a cart of returned books through the aisles, she said, "You ever worked in a library before?" He paused. "I don't know." Claire tilted her head. "You act like you have." He didn't respond. There was a silence, soft and unthreatening. He had learned to accept these gaps without needing to fill them. That same day, after the library closed, she offered him tea in the back room. The kettle wheezed on a portable burner while rain tapped the windows. She sat on a stool and asked carefully, "Do you really not remember anything?" He stared into his cup. "Nothing. It's like waking up after a long dream and everything's out of focus." Claire took a sip of her own tea. "And you don't want to find out?" He shrugged. "I'm not sure if I'm ready to know who I was. What if I don't like the answer?" She considered that, then reached under the counter and pulled out a stack of old newspapers. "Then maybe you start small. This library keeps everything, every paper from the last 50 years. Might jog something." He raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting I read through 50 years of newspapers?" She grinned. "Only the last one, let's say the last 12 months. He didn't say no. They started in the evenings, 1 or 2 issues at a time, slowly paging through the local paper, the Briarwood Times. Stories about car crashes, city council decisions, school board meetings. Nothing stood out, until a headline froze him mid-sip one night. "Mayor missing after ethics scandal rocks City Hall." His hands trembled as he read. The article was dated 11 months prior. The photo showed a clean-shaven man in a dark suit at a podium. His face was thinner but unmistakable. It was him. Claire peered over his shoulder. "Wait, is that—" He nodded slowly. "I think so." The article claimed that Mayor John R. Ellison disappeared days after being accused of funneling city funds into a private account. It noted public outcry, a temporary replacement, and a continuing investigation. But the tone of the piece was cautious. Nothing was confirmed. "John," Claire said, testing the name. It didn't feel right in his mouth. Not yet. He read the article again. The more he stared at the photo, the more fragments buzzed behind his eyes. Flashes of a campaign banner, a raised hand in a town hall meeting, his voice saying, "Let's rebuild trust together." But none of it felt solid. None of it felt his. He folded the article carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. What if I was guilty? Claire looked at him, long and thoughtful. Then why would you be here fixing library books instead of hiding in another state? He had no answer. That night, he wandered the streets again, past the courthouse, past boarded-up shops, past a mural of community leaders painted on brick. He found his way back to the plaza with the empty fountain. The candy wrapper was still in his coat lining. He took it out and sat quietly. He remembered the little girl's words, "You're nice. I can tell." He clung to them. The next morning, he returned to the library earlier than usual. Claire was there already, sorting microfilm. Without a word, she handed him a folder marked City Hall Archives, Press Clippings. Inside were dozens of yellowed pages, speeches, budget proposals, press releases signed Mayor John Ellison. He read them all. The man in those documents spoke in measured tones. He emphasized fairness, transparency, infrastructure development. There were photos, too. Shaking hands with teachers, visiting hospitals, planting trees. He looked proud, sure of himself, but not arrogant, not deceitful. Something in his chest shifted. He was beginning to believe that man had meant well, maybe even done good. Why would someone disappear after working so hard for the city? Claire asked aloud. He stared at a photo from a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Unless someone wanted me gone. That theory opened a door in his mind. If he was framed, then someone had to benefit from his disappearance. Claire suggested they look into who had taken office after his vanishing. They found the name: Mayor Douglas Greer, former city treasurer. His rise had been quiet, nearly unchallenged, justified as a necessary transition during instability. Something about it smelled off. They dove into city council records, budget changes, committee shuffles. Greer had reversed several of Ellison's policies. A public health initiative was cut. A housing project paused. Contracts were rerouted to companies with vague connections. "We need more than suspicion," Claire said. He nodded. "Then we need someone who remembers the truth." They visited a food pantry where he used to volunteer. He hoped someone might recognize him, but nobody did. Either they didn't remember or didn't want to. He almost gave up until a janitor at the old city hall let them into the basement archives. Claire flashed her library badge and claimed it was a historical research initiative. In the dark stacks of dusty boxes, he found it. A binder labeled Mayoral Correspondence 20 XX. Inside were typed memos, meeting notes, and a draft of a speech he had no memory writing, but recognized in his bones. "We must not build a city that forgets its weakest," it read. "A government that sees its people as numbers loses its soul." He touched the page. It was real. Claire leaned in. "You didn't write that if you were just another corrupt suit." Something stirred again. He left the building feeling heavier and clearer at once. They walked back in silence. Evening had fallen. Near the same plaza as before, a small crowd had gathered for a winter charity drive. Hot cocoa, scarves, free books. He stopped short. Among the people, handing out gloves, was the little girl, the one with the pink coat. She spotted him instantly and grinned. "Hey, I remember you. You're the mayor." His breath caught. "What did you say?" "You're the man from the posters," she said. "I told my mom it was you, but she said the mayor disappeared. But I knew. I gave you candy." Her mother turned, startled. She studied him for a long moment, then her eyes softened. Claire stepped beside him. "Do you remember her?" He knelt gently. "You gave me something when I had nothing. Do you know that?" The girl nodded proudly. "I think you helped me remember who I was," he said, voice thick. "Thank you." As he stood, the weight of who he had been, of who he might still be, settled in his chest. He wasn't ready to declare himself yet. Not without proof, not without knowing the full truth. But the spark had become a flame. There was no going back now, not when he'd finally seen a glimpse of the man in the mirror. And she had called him nice. He had to earn that again. He couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the little girl's face, the unwavering certainty in her voice when she called him the mayor. Her innocence had shattered something fragile inside him and left behind something sturdier. The name John Ellison no longer felt like a stranger's. It hovered on his skin, just out of reach, like the scent of smoke after a fire. He sat awake on the cot in the church shelter, the fluorescent lights buzzing above like dull thoughts. In his hand, he held the speech draft from the City Hall archives. The words stirred something he couldn't name. He had written this. He had meant every word. By morning, he had made a decision. No more drifting. If he was ever going to reclaim himself, or clear himself, he needed the whole picture. Claire was already at the library when he arrived. Her eyes widened when she saw him, a rare flicker of worry in her otherwise calm demeanor. "Did you sleep?" He shook his head. "I remember the cadence of the speech," he said. "Not the memory, not the moment, but how it sounded when I said it aloud. That's something, isn't it?" She smiled slowly. That's a start. They began digging in earnest. Claire reached out to a former colleague in the university's political science department who had archived mayoral campaigns and public debates. The professor sent them recordings and debate transcripts from the year Ellison was elected. His voice, measured, warm, steady, was instantly recognizable. In one debate, he'd said, "I didn't grow up dreaming of politics. I dreamed of fairness. And fairness, I've learned, doesn't happen by itself. You have to fight for it." The man watching the recording felt a tremor in his hands. He had fought for something. So who had fought against him? Claire built a whiteboard timeline in the library's back office. Photos, news clippings, and city memos covered it like a crime scene in a detective drama. The turning point was clear. A new transportation contract issued 8 months into Ellison's term. A small shell company, Urban Sync, had been awarded millions to modernize city buses, an initiative that Ellison had publicly championed. But after his disappearance, Urban Sync's work stalled. The money stayed spent, the changes never came, and no one was held accountable. "Who owns Urban Sync?" Claire asked one day, squinting at incorporation documents. They followed a breadcrumb trail through layered LLCs and obscure filings. Finally, a name emerged: Carter Rourke. "Who's he?" she asked. He stared at the name, heart tightening. I think I know him." Rourke had been Ellison's deputy chief of staff, according to one early memo. Smart, ambitious, the kind of man who smiled through closed teeth. Claire found footage of him stepping in as acting press liaison the week Ellison vanished. The transition had been smooth. Too smooth. The man they were beginning to understand, John Ellison, had ruffled feathers. He had paused development deals that favored out-of-state investors. He had proposed new audits for long-standing city contracts. He had canceled a major real estate redevelopment plan near the waterfront due to insufficient community oversight. Each move had made enemies. He hadn't disappeared randomly. He'd been erased. And the man who'd filled the power vacuum, Douglas Greer, had been silent during it all. One Friday morning, Claire came in holding a sealed envelope. "This came through the interlibrary loan system," she said, confused. "But it's not from a library. No return address." He opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten letter dated nearly a year prior. It was addressed to the people of Briarwood and signed John R. Ellison. In the letter, Ellison wrote about dark forces inside City Hall, an inner circle that was resisting reform at every turn. He said he feared for his career, even his safety, and promised to speak more openly soon. The letter had never been published. Someone had buried it. Claire read it aloud, slowly, as if giving breath to something long dead. At the bottom of the envelope, a note was scrawled, "I believe you. A friend." He looked at her. "Someone's watching. Someone who knows." The air in the library seemed to thicken with consequence. It was no longer just a mystery. It was a conspiracy, and the stakes were rising. They decided to visit an old colleague of Ellison's, a retired city planner named Ruth Denning. She had once been a public advocate and had worked closely with his administration. Now, she lived in a modest home just outside the city, tending to orchids and making tea. Ruth studied his face carefully. "I didn't believe it when they said you stole that money," she said softly. "But I thought, maybe you just cracked under the pressure. I never imagined this." He nodded. "I don't remember what happened, but I think I was trying to protect something. Maybe someone." She poured him tea and told them what she knew, meetings that had been rescheduled without notice, key documents that went missing from the mayor's office, how Rourke had started making executive decisions while Ellison was still officially in charge. "He didn't even try to pretend," Ruth said bitterly. "It was like you were already gone." Claire asked if she still had access to any of the planning archives. Ruth grinned. "I might have kept a few files, just in case." In her basement, they found binders of detailed city planning documents. One of them included annotated maps for the waterfront redevelopment Ellison had paused, plans that had been quietly reactivated 6 months after his disappearance, and signed off by Douglas Greer. He had taken the paused project and pushed it through while no one noticed. The pieces were aligning. Back in the library, they laid everything out. The documents, the articles, the letter, the map. They compiled a full dossier, a timeline of John Ellison's efforts, his disappearance, and the actions taken in his absence. "I need to speak up," he said. Claire hesitated. "We don't know how far this goes." "I don't care," he said, voice firm. "This isn't just about clearing my name anymore. It's about the city." They agreed to plan carefully. No dramatic press conference, no sudden confrontation. But the first step was reintroducing him to the world, one person at a time. They decided to return to the library's community night. Families, teachers, council members, they all came through at some point. It was a trusted place. At the next event, Claire casually introduced him to a city councilwoman who had known Ellison. Her eyes narrowed. "You look familiar? Have we met?" He offered a soft smile. "I'm starting to remember. I think we worked together once, a long time ago." She tilted her head. "You were the mayor." Claire stepped in. "He's been recovering from serious memory trauma, but he's remembering, and we have evidence." The woman's demeanor changed. She led them aside, into an alcove by the stairwell, away from curious ears. "Do you know what you're walking back into?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I know why." She studied him, then nodded. "Then let's talk." And with that, the tide began to shift. They had allies now. Not many, but enough. The truth was no longer buried. It was surfacing, one fragment at a time. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of movement and murmurs, quiet meetings in corners of the library, unspoken nods between strangers who remembered a different kind of mayor, emails exchanged under pseudonyms, whispers that something was waking in the city's heart. His name, once erased, was returning, but not through fanfare or spectacle. It returned through stories. A former sanitation supervisor remembered how Mayor Ellison had stood in a downpour during a strike to listen to workers' grievances. A retired nurse remembered the mayor touring her understaffed clinic at midnight after a budget cut. One man recalled him sitting in the last pew at his brother's funeral, not for political points, but because he had cared. Each story built a scaffold of self around the man who still walked carefully through every memory. He didn't declare himself. He didn't seek attention, but word spread. Claire printed out the full dossier, 3 copies, one for the press, one for the council, and one to keep safe. She placed them in folders marked simply, "The Mayor." He still wasn't sure that title belonged to him. Not until the memory broke through. It came at night in the plaza under the same fountain where the little girl had once changed his life with a single piece of candy. He had returned there instinctively. The city was lit in frost and holiday lights. People bustled around him, but he sat still on the stone rim, clutching the folded candy wrapper. He closed his eyes, and it happened. He saw himself behind a podium in City Hall's main chamber. The crowd pressed close, packed shoulder to shoulder. Sweat dampened his collar as the heat of the lights baked his skin. He looked down at his speech, but didn't read it. "I'm not here to campaign," he had said, his voice strong. "I'm here to be held accountable." Flash, applause, then quiet. "I know what some of you think, that I'm too honest to survive in politics, that I don't play the game. But I didn't run for office to play a game. I ran to stop one." He opened his eyes. The scene had been too vivid to be imagination. He remembered it, all of it, the campaign, the oath of office, the long nights with community leaders, the first time he vetoed a bill pushed by Greer and Rourke, the feeling of the letter in his hand, the one he'd written and never sent. He remembered the meeting that sealed it all, a private lunch, a confrontation, Rourke leaning forward across the table with a false smile. "You don't want to die a martyr, John. Take the leave. Let Greer transition in quietly. We'll give you a consultant title, a payout. Walk away." He remembered the rage, the refusal, the threat, and then the stairwell. He'd never fallen. He'd been pushed. It was quick. Slick shoes on smooth marble, his head cracking against concrete, the world fading into static. That was the last thing he remembered before waking up in the abandoned building. Now it all returned like a tidal wave. He sat, stunned, on the edge of the fountain. The chill didn't touch him. He wasn't shivering. He was on fire. By morning, he stood in front of City Hall. He wore a clean jacket Claire had found him. His hair was trimmed, his beard neatened. He looked like himself again, but stronger, clearer, steadier. Claire stood beside him. So did Ruth. So did the city councilwoman who had taken him seriously when no one else would. They weren't breaking in, they had an appointment. Inside, they met with the city's Ethics and Oversight Committee. The acting chair, a sharp-eyed man with decades of political wear on his face, narrowed his gaze as the man stepped forward. "You have something to say?" He nodded. "I am John R. Ellison. I was the elected mayor of this city. I disappeared nearly a year ago under circumstances I now understand were criminal." The room shifted. "I was not sick. I was silenced, not by illness, but by a system afraid of change. I present to you evidence of that system's rot." Claire passed out the folders. The committee flipped pages. Eyebrows rose. Pens scribbled margins. He waited. When they looked up, he said simply, "This city deserves better. I won't ask for reinstatement. I don't need a title. But I won't let you pretend this never happened." The chair leaned back. "We'll need to verify every word." "You should," he said. "That's what I would have done." That night, local reporters published the story. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Former mayor returns with evidence of corruption. Questions raised about Greer administration. Ethics investigation launched. The public response was immediate. Online forums exploded. Talk radio debated. People on the street whispered again. And then, unexpectedly, someone shouted his name in a grocery store. "Ellison!" He turned. A woman with graying braids and a yellow scarf pointed at him. "You gave me my first grant, helped my bakery open. You saved my life." He smiled. "It's good to see you again." Later that week, he received an invitation to address the city council. Claire stood with him behind the curtain. He adjusted the mic on his lapel and looked into the mirror one last time. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Yes," he said, "I do." The chamber was packed, every seat filled, cameras rolling, council members watching, Greer absent. He walked to the podium. The lights were the same, but he was not. "I come not as a ghost of the past," he began, "but as proof that truth survives." He told his story, not with theatrics, but with honesty. He outlined the timeline, the betrayal, the injury, the recovery. He named names. He made no accusations without proof. He didn't ask for justice. He demanded it. The chamber sat in silence when he finished. Then, one clap, two, then a wave. People stood, not for applause, for acknowledgement. That night, he declined every interview. Instead, he went back to the plaza. The little girl was there again, this time with her mother. "You remember me now?" she asked. He crouched down. "I never forgot you. I just forgot myself." She grinned. "You look happier." "I am." She handed him a new candy. This one was grape. "Different flavor," she said. He took it. Sometimes change is good. The city did not change overnight. No headlines announced a revolution. No parades marched through the streets. The wheels of bureaucracy, of justice, of memory, these moved slowly. But something more powerful than scandal had taken root in Briarwood. Hope. In the weeks that followed his public testimony, investigations deepened. Greer, facing mounting scrutiny, quietly resigned from office, citing health reasons. Carter Rourke, ever more elusive, left the city altogether. Ethics committees began pouring through years of overlooked documents. New elections were announced. John Ellison did not campaign. He refused when urged to run again, even by those who once doubted his innocence. "I've already served," he said simply. "Now I want to serve differently." He meant it. His days no longer revolved around speeches or meetings behind mahogany doors. He spent mornings walking the streets, not as a politician, but as a man rediscovering his city. He visited food pantries, sat quietly in shelters, listened in libraries. He carried a notebook now, recording stories, names, needs, not to track favors or score points, but to remember what mattered. It was on one of these walks that he found himself in the schoolyard where the little girl had first approached him. There she was again, this time on the jungle gym, her braids flying behind her as she raced down the slide. Her mother waved warmly from a nearby bench. He approached gently. "Hi," she said, running up to him. "Hi," he said back, crouching to her eye level. "I've been thinking about that candy you gave me." "The grape one?" "The first one." She tilted her head. "The red one?" "That's the one that saved me." She looked confused. "I was lost, really lost, and you helped me remember that I mattered, that I was still good." She giggled. "It was just candy." He shook his head. "It was everything." The idea came to him then, not in a blaze of inspiration, but like the slow rising of a tide. That evening, he wrote the mission statement in his notebook. One small act of kindness can restore an entire life. The Candy Foundation was born the next week. It started humbly, with Claire helping to register the nonprofit and Ruth advising on community outreach. They found an abandoned storefront on Sycamore Street and turned it into a warm, bright space, half drop-in center, half children's library, half vocational training hub. It didn't need to fit neatly into categories. It needed to serve. Its logo was simple, a wrapped candy, red and gold, above the words, "You Matter." Donations came quickly, many anonymous, some substantial. Former council members, teachers, nurses, veterans, bakers. Even the city's new interim mayor quietly sent a check. No strings, just belief. Ellison refused to have his name on the foundation. "This isn't about remembering me," he said. "It's about remembering everyone else we forget." The girl, her name was Amara, was made the honorary founder. She stood proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony in a white dress with sunflowers on it, her hand in her mother's, her grin wider than the sky. Reporters asked her if she understood what she had started. She shrugged. "I just didn't want him to be sad. Ellison kept the candy wrapper in a frame on his desk, the original, wrinkled, faded, sacred. As winter faded into spring, the foundation began offering literacy programs, small grants to struggling families, therapy sessions for unhoused youth, and mentorship opportunities led by volunteers who had once known the street life themselves. Ellison led quietly. He spoke rarely, only when needed, and always from the heart. He resisted the lure of status, of spotlight. He had had all that once, and nearly lost his soul to it. Now he built something that would not rise and fall with popularity, something deeper. One rainy afternoon, Claire found him in the office alone, sipping tea and watching the rain pool on the sidewalk outside. She sat beside him. "You never asked why I helped you," she said. He looked at her. "I figured you'd tell me if it mattered." She smiled. "When I was in high school, I wanted to be invisible. And one day, someone saw me, a stranger. He said I had good ideas, that I should write." He blinked. "Was it me?" She nodded. "You gave a speech at our school. You told a quiet kid in the back row that her words could shape the world." He exhaled slowly, deeply. "I never forgot that," she said. "So when you needed someone, I just gave it back." He nodded. That night, he walked the city until it slept. He saw the windows glowing in the shelter, a new mural being painted on the library's brick wall, a row of hands passing small objects, books, fruit, a wrapped candy. At the center of the city plaza, the fountain had been repaired. Water flowed again. He sat on its edge, just as he had the first time he'd met Amara. But now he wasn't cold. He wasn't lost. A child ran past. "Mr. Candyman," the boy called. "You coming to story time?" He smiled. "I wouldn't miss it." He rose and walked back toward the Foundation's building, where laughter echoed from inside and fresh coffee warmed the room, where no one cared if he'd once been a mayor, only that he showed up, and every day he did, not for glory, but because someone once gave him a piece of candy and reminded him who he was. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to come. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, share it. It might be the candy they need today.